Hi, everybody, and thank you for coming and joining us for June's Sharing Hope Community Conversations. June is Pride Month. So this month, we are talking about the LGBTQ community, people and their identities, and how we work that with our community and how our community addresses it and deals with it, and the mental health impact of it all. So I'm so excited. We have three great guests with us. I'm going to let them each tell you a little bit about themselves, starting with Lena Queen.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, beautiful humans. I am Lena Queen. I go by Queen. My pronouns are they and she. I am the owner of Journey Wellness and Consulting Group based out of Wilmington, Delaware. We are an outpatient mental health practice that specializes in sexuality and gender and just overall well being, focusing on post traumatic growth, in addition to support for survivors and those in navigating relationships. I am also the president of the Newcastle County Youth Pride Festival, which is a nonprofit organization that focuses on social action organization that focuses on mental health for queer youth up to the age of 24. And I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Nice. Thank you so much for joining us, Queen. We're looking forward to having your input. And next we have Tanisha Brown. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yep, my name is Tanisha Brown. I am the Crisis Service Coordinator here at Contact Lifeline, which is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week crisis hotline where we take calls from the National Suicide Prevention Line and other sexual assaults for Kent and Sussex County. And I'm just really excited to be here today.
Nice. Thank you. So happy to have you joining us. And then next, I don't want to mispronounce your name, so I will let you say your name, Miss Freeman. I'll just let you say your first name.
Yep. My name is Kiana Freeman. I go by Cookie. So Cookie is if that's easier for you. I am a pre-licensed therapist at Journey Wellness Delaware. And Queen explained Journey Wellness's practices. I am also a board certified holistic health practitioner and the founder and president of Freely Life Services for Individuals and Families Incorporated, as well as Freely Integrated Health Wealth. I am also a youth mobile crisis clinician part-time for an organization here in the state of Delaware. My focus is working with youth and adults, BIPOC and LGBTQI+, initiating counseling services. I'm also a certified family life educator. So I initiate charity and advocacy as well for these communities.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us. So when we get into these discussions, the first thing I kind of wanted to do is educate a little bit, right? So I feel like when you talk about LGBTQ, it's like what do those stand for? And then everybody is big on pronouns right now, which I feel is awesome. But there's also a lot of people who are like, pronouns, like what is that? Like what is she, they? Why is it not she, her? And what is going on with all of this? So would any of you like to just explain a little bit about pronouns and the different ways that people are able to identify and why it's important that we identify them by their pronoun?
So I'll start. I think we are seeing an increased visibility of sexuality and gender outside of heteronormative norms. And so when people are empowered to embrace their authentic self, it's necessary to set boundaries, because people are understanding who they are. So it is about a reclaiming of really healing indigenous and sexuality and gender that we have lost over a particular period of time, but has always been there, right? Our queer and trans elders have always been here, but safely, the matter of safety has always been the thing. So what we're seeing is an increased visibility. And the reason to honor one's pronouns is really to honor the boundaries that they set, no different than you would want your boundaries to be honored. I always say, just because you don't understand a thing doesn't mean you can't have compassionate for people's experiences, right? So not understanding why I'm an agender Black queer person doesn't mean that you cannot be compassionate to this agender Black queer person. So
Absolutely.
I'll start there.
Oh, what does it mean when someone says that they identify as like a they or non-binary? What does that mean?
So non-binary means, so we've been socialized. I always talk about the defaults of sexual and societal socialization. And in those defaults, there are defaults of understanding certain things, that people are born cisgender, that people are born heterosexual, that there
And
are
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt really quick. What does cisgender mean? I just want to
yes.
make sure anyone
So
who tunes
no, not a
in.
problem. So cisgender means that those who identify and agree with the gender they're assigned at birth. Again, we've been socialized to believe that gender is genitals, and what we understand now is that gender is identity. But society and culture gives context and value to gender, right? So transgender folks and non-binary folks are saying, you know, yes, society can give culture and value to these things, naming and meanings to these things, but I am not of those things. Um, so really what we're talking about is being able to understand that a non-binary person such as myself understands their gender is expansive and not just man or woman. I think we also have a tendency to use male and female, which have a lot of things, which is everything about one's reproductive organs and not necessarily their sense of gender. So I think that's the other thing too, recognizing that gender is not biological, but we've been socialized and taught culturally that gender is biological.
Yes,
I
definitely.
agree. And if I may, when we start to break those heteronormativity beliefs and we understand that gender is fluid, um, asking one's pronouns is probably the most respectful way to not assume that they are he or he, and I'm sorry, he, him, or she, her, or she, they. So asking pronouns is not just about boundary setting, but also about being respectful, whether you understand it or not. It's knowing that, okay, just because I look this way does not mean that this is how I identify. So being respectful and asking pronouns.
Yeah, I think that that is huge and a great point, because it's respectful and it shows that you care about the person that you're talking to on some level, that you want to know them well. And I think that it's also important, like you mentioned with the respect thing, and also how you feel. I talk frequently about how important representation is, for me as just a Black woman in America. But I would assume, like, as you're even more marginalized because of your sexuality or your gender, that that representation matters even more, and also being addressed as what you really are matters even more so. Tanisha, what you deal with a lot of different people. Would you say that people's sense of like sexual identity and not feeling accepted is a, I don't know if trigger is the right word, but is a frequent cause of things that cause people to end up sort of in your care, in your state?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you misgender someone, especially if you are a young person growing up and trying to teach either your parents or your grandparents about the pronouns and what they mean, and people not being able to accept them at the time or don't even understand what they are. So I'm so glad that you made her go back, like, what's cisgender? And, going through everything, because that becomes really hard. That person is seeking to, embrace their identity and who I am, who they are, and then they're being met with all of these different triggers because we don't know the trauma that they experienced of them just trying to be their authentic self, whatever it is. And so we get people who call definitely on the National Suicide Prevention Line all the time, and that is one of the biggest numbers that we get when we get the phone calls, just people just trying to be themselves and having to fight all of these different layers of, whether it's even at work, bureaucracy and all these other things. Like, I just want to be me, and why can't someone just accept me for what I want to do? So we get a lot of that, and it's really hard to navigate. What we do here, we definitely affirm them. We use their pronouns, and definitely if they call back and things like that, connect them to community resources that are relevant. I'm not going to send you somewhere that's not going to help you and be relevant. I'm going to send you exactly where you need to go so that you can get the help that you need if you are being triggered by that.
Yes, which is good, because sometimes getting the help and finding someone you can talk to is the hardest step. So it's always great when you're able to be connected to someone who can listen to you and who can hear you. Queen, when you were talking, you mentioned that you know um, queer and gay folks and all of that have been around for a long time. It's just a matter of feeling safe and feeling comfortable to come out. And, I think a lot of people don't even realize when we talk about things like non-binary, people think it's like some new age thing when it's been around forever in different cultures, like perhaps not the strict Christian culture that a lot of our ancestors have adapted to, is the best way I can put it. But prior to that, when you go back to like true ancestry of both Black people in Africa and Indigenous people here, they had parts of their society where people were known to have both feminine and masculine traits. And they weren't the, like the pariah of society. They were looked to as being more knowledgeable, having more knowledge and being able to help and see more things. And we've definitely, since religions have shifted in some cultures, lost sight of that. And it's almost like a coming back to it. Why did I have is it Kiona? Did I say it right that time?
It's Kiana, but you can say
Kiana.
Cookie if it's easier. I say it's Donna with the K-E in front of it, right? Drop the D and add a K.
Okay,
Kiana.
I'll get it before the end of the call. But when we talk about that with the different the ways that our culture sort of like accepts that, I feel like we, especially in the Black culture, have for the longest time been highly homophobic. And a lot of it is we will revert it back to religion. And because it's not godly, then it's like, but our ancestors actually were cool with this. But, how that, I feel like that's something that's just, it's a constant thing that we sort of have to battle, talking about how is that sort of conversation addressed with individuals who come to see you? Is that something that you address?
It is, and I have several youth that identify as transgender that I do see that come through with suicidal ideation and are struggling because the religion in their home says that they cannot be this. And we talk about what I teach the parents is that, first of all, support, right? Support is everything. Support is probably the number one, or parental acceptance is the number one support system that our youth need that identify as transgender. But I explain to the parents that if you say that God is your higher power, or Allah is your higher power, and these two higher powers are through love, this is all love, right? So I say love is the creative force. Love is the foundation for everything, right? And all we want to do, and I say we because I also identify as queer. I am a lesbian. I say that all we want to do is love, and if that is all we're doing, we're loving each other, and we are not displaying hate, then from your religious perspective that God is love and Allah is love, then I need you to understand that this is all love, and that might be an easier way for you to understand it and accept it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, like I said, it's just such a difficult conversation, especially if you do grow up religious. I know for me, growing up conservative and religious, there was a lot of that, like, well, it's not right. But I always came back with, well, what about God doesn't make mistakes? So if God doesn't make mistakes and people are born a certain way, then why is it a problem? Like you said, if it's love is love. I imagine you have those conversations as well, Queen, with the youth and the different people you work with. How do you navigate those?
I actually appreciate this conversation too, because the one thing that I've learned in developing Journey Wellness is that Black sexuality doesn't show up the way white sexuality white does, right? And where we have, where white culture has religious institutions that are very affirming, right? Traditionally in the Black church is not very affirming. So how I navigate that, honestly, by some of my colleagues, to get more information about, honestly, the language of the Bible, like really going to like some of the things, right? I have a sexology and theology packet that I share with family by Dr. Mark Levain and Dr. Beverly Dale out of Philadelphia, who are theology and sexuality scholars who really discuss and disseminate like how homophobia was actually injected into contemporary theology, and really wasn't a basis of theology. And there's some things that are really not clear. So I give that to families to be like, here, disseminate, among yourselves. But the process is too, going back to Kiana's thing, is like about love, right? And like understanding self. And the one thing that Billy Porter even said in his interview with Tamira Hall is like, people want to take God away from us and want to take our spirituality away from us, like we're not of God. So really it is about honoring that relationship between spirit with folks, and like, what do they want that relationship to be? I am someone who practices a variety of African centered spiritualities, right, coming from Christianity. So it is about understanding and navigating a personal relationship, right? And then finding safety in that personal relationship and finding communities that support that relationship. We understand, Delaware is a definitely Black Christian conservative state, so it has been very hard locating those resources that are formed in that informed in faith. So it is about going back to like, what is love? If there's 3 types of love, it's like, again, why can you not show compassion for some things you don't understand? And if you are, and the one thing I would say to folks is like, if you are exercising judgment right now, I thought that was something God did. Right. So really being able to, how do you activate self-compassion and empathy, and then give people information so that way they can make informed choices and make sure those who are trying to navigate their relationship with God feel supported and find the resources to do so.
Absolutely. And Lucinda said, to add to the speaker's point of view, also, if we are made in his own image, then everything reflects God, which is true. And I also wanted to address something that you said as well, which is that, Black sexuality shows up different. And it absolutely does. And it's frustrating, I guess is the best word, that we are in so many ways like hyper and overly sexualized, right? Like a young girl, will be called like fast for wearing shorts, where, as you can see, like her counterpart, like a white little girl is treated more innocent than necessarily a Black little girl, even if they're doing like the same thing, but the way that they're viewed. And then even with the men as well, outside of just the stereotype of like Black thugs or blah, 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 there's like a whole subsection for Black men in porn, like, because they are so highly sexualized. So the way that and like, I feel like that all comes back into play, even like whether you're talking about hetero, sex roles, genders, whatever, and then, or whether you're talking about LGBTQ, I think it has a huge impact. And it impacts how people see themselves. So Tanisha, when we think more about like the mental health side of it, right? The growth of it. Now it's interesting because I always find it interesting when kids talk about like who they have a crush on or who they like. And it's totally fine if that person fits the norms, right? Like if I'm a little girl and I have a crush on a little boy, then it's like, oh. But if I'm a little girl and I have a crush on a little girl or a boy and a boy, and that's like, oh, well, you don't know, you'll grow out of it. You'll just, it's a phase. But no one ever tells the straight person it's a phase. So it's absolutely believable that some kids know when they're younger as well. How would someone go about addressing that if they thought that that was something that maybe their child is, I don't want to say dealing with, but living through, that their child is living through, and they want to be supportive? Like, what's a good way to sort of address that?
I want to piggyback. I'm gonna call you Miss Cookie, even though I know it says Kiana. I want to pay. The first thing, like she said, is the support. As a mother of a young person who is a lesbian, that took a long time. It took a long time for her to get to, because as we're talking about this Christianity, like, she has a side of her family, they're all about these Christian beliefs, and there's nothing outside of that. And so even when she was younger, she displayed and she told me things, when she was younger, about liking girls. And I went to her and I was like, okay, well, you can like girls, that's a cool thing. I'm like, but I like girls too. I like them as friends. I like them as, my buddies that hang out. And I was like, well, what kind of do you like them? Is really explaining it. And it's the parents' job to educate themselves. It is not their job. They're just trying to navigate their best self at 5. That's really confusing. At a 5-year-old, you're like, oh no, you're going to grow out of it and you think it's bad and you're doing these things. And that support and learning and educating is the most important thing. And do you just like them to be your friends, or would you like to hug them, and touch them? That gets into different areas where you get to know and let them understand that these are two different things. And you definitely educate. There was a time when my daughter was very young. She, was like, I think I may be transgender. Okay, we're looking at YouTube videos. I know, transgender people in my life, but I've never raised them. They're not my children, and it's different. So, it's that education, it's that support, is letting them know that my job is to protect you. And even if I have to protect you against family and friends and other people, I'm going to make sure that you have a safe environment to grow up in. I'm going to do my best. Now, we have to talk about when you walk outside the door. Your gender expression is male. They're automatically going to see that and think that, but you're not. And so, getting her to educate her own self and setting up her boundaries, just like Queen said earlier, I have a boundary. I am a girl and you can address me by my name, and you don't have to say, oh, that little boy or this, that, because that's what we do. We do gender everything. So creating that, supporting that foundation in your home and outside, and taking your kid through each step that they will go through as they experience it, and allow them to express themselves no matter what it is, no matter what, as long as it's safe and they're being safe with it. And what we have here, especially here at Contact, that we're getting, and I'm sure at JFS and other people who have these really good programs, I'm sure Queen, is like, these young people, they don't feel safe, because what you see on the news, what you see on Instagram, because they all live on social media, they're seeing, the killing of, Black trans women, constantly, like, is that going to happen to me? And then, because she was indoctrinated with so much Christianity in the beginning, she was like, are you telling me I'm going to go to hell? And that, like, scared her. It was like fear, to where almost, I don't even know if I want to do this anymore. Excuse me, that is you. That you don't have to go anywhere. This is you, and this is how we're going to make you safe, and different things like that. So it is very hard, especially when you're trying to educate other people in your family and friend circle, to just be supportive.
Yeah, and I think that that's the most that we can do. And you touched on a great point with, especially those that have grown up super religious and have spent a whole lifetime hearing certain things. On my personal Instagram page, I do IG lives on Tuesdays about mental health. And last night I spoke with a Black social worker who also identifies as queer. And we talked about the fact that he didn't come out as bisexual to his family until his 30s, because he had spent so much of his life being told that it was wrong and feeling that it meant part of him was wrong. And I would imagine that a lot of people have to go through that, which makes me really sad. I think that for me, because I don't know, I guess I don't really question it as much, because I've always kind of been sure in where I was on that. And I also now realize that being gay or straight is on a spectrum, right? So part of the things that not a lot of people realize is that you're not gay, bi, straight. It's like you're gay, but you might kind of like girls. You're straight, but every now and then you think someone's attractive. Like you don't have to be forced into those labels or into those boxes. But I do know for a fact that I had my first like real crush when I was 10, and I thought he was so cute. He's my Sunday school teacher, don't tell. But I had like real love feelings. But no one, I couldn't imagine like if those like, oh, I feel all this way had been for someone of the same sex, and like how to navigate that and how to talk about that and how to deal with that. Do any of you feel like there's ever an age where it's too young to talk about? Because I know right now a debate in a lot of places is starting sex education young, which I am all for, because I think it helps with abuse. I think kids need to know things. I don't think sex education is like, here's how to put a condom on a banana. Like sex education is like, here are your body parts. Here's, how to have body autonomy. It's not necessarily just sex, it's everything around that. So I think that young is good to start teaching them those things so that they know how to set those boundaries and they know what they're dealing with. But as far as sexuality, do you think that there's a age that's too young to have that conversation?
Well, I know that Cookie and Queen will go. I'm gonna say, as a parent, like my daughter, I knew that my daughter was definitely LGBTQ when she was 3. And it was one incident that stood out to me. And I was like, "Ugh, I knew it. I was like, I knew it. I was happy to know it. But I had
Yeah.
to talk to her at 3 years old. You're going to play to your audience. I'm not going to use these big giant words to talk to a 3-year-old about her sexuality. I
Yeah.
am going to inform her of her body parts and who gets to touch them and who doesn't, and all of these different things. And as she got older, you just add on an extra piece every time. And by the time she was 8, she was like, I got it. And she was like, now that I got it, no more dresses, no more skirts, no
Yeah.
more church shoes, no more. I said, listen, it's you. You do all, you don't want it, no more. And it was a transition for my family. It was just like, okay, now we buy this. Like, I don't even know how to buy boy clothes again, because my kids have such a vast age difference.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, how do you do this when they're this age? Because I didn't have to buy them. Their dad bought them. So these are new things. But, with her talking about it, I believe in, like you said, with trauma, teaching young people about themselves, their organs, all of those things definitely should be happening at super young age. You can't wait till 12 years old when they're lusting all over the place and having
Yeah.
social media relationships to say, hey, listen, if you do this, this is going to happen. Way too late. You've waited way too long.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, I agree. I don't think that there is an age limit, and from my personal experience, I knew that I liked girls at the age of 5. But because we didn't talk about sexuality, I didn't even know what that meant, right?
Mhm.
And so for a very long time, I lived this life just thinking I was supposed to have a boyfriend, and no one ever heard of another girl liking a girl. Like, what is that? And questioning myself. And even maybe at the age of 7, having a suicidal thought because I'm liking these girls. I think they're cute, but why? Right? Because my parents are a male and a female, and my mother, and my father are male and female. Just seeing the whole, the heterosexual, just growing up and seeing all of that, and being raised in a church where, Baptist and Christian, and there was only man and woman or boy and girl. I had no idea that I could like a girl, but I did. And because we didn't talk about it, I had no idea. So I feel like as early as you can understand, 2 years old, 3 years old, talk about it for sure. Educate.
Yeah, absolutely. As a parent and a grandparent, right? My daughter's 28. My grandbaby is 6. For my granddaughter, I feel like it's like a do-over, right? I didn't have the information that I have now, right? So my daughter practices conscious parenting, and like to be able to give her, like you said, those baby steps, right? We give them age appropriate, comprehensive sex education. I think because the world that we live in is so wrapped up in sex negativity, and for Black folks particularly, it is obviously too out of trauma, right? Like sexual trauma and culturally what sexual trauma has impacted us as a community, right, has left us in this place of where we don't feel comfortable talking about sexuality. And when we think of sex, we think of sexual, right, and sexualness instead of sexuality being the whole person. So it really is about, confronting that fear and negativity, and then recognizing like we're in 2021, right? Like there is so much good information out there,
Yeah.
and when I talk to parents, I'm like, what do you wish you knew? And you have an opportunity right now to teach your children, right? And there's so many resources in order to do that, right? Sex positive families, advocates for you. Like there's so many things. I'm like, now, like we have the information. So comprehensive sex education is important. And also too, about being able to give permission to those who are marginalized to teach us, right? Because who has permission to be sexual, who has permission to talk about sexuality, and who doesn't? And that's something we need to be able to talk about, because that's also cloaked in respectability politics, and who has access to sexuality information. So our children should have it, right? Our children should have it, because our numbers are too high in all the things. And it's not about fault. It is about socialization and culture. And we absolutely have an opportunity to shift culture,
Mhm. And I
to
think that's
provide
the
those
biggest
babies
thing.
information. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that we need is that shift in culture and talking about stuff. Something that drives me crazy, and it's not just Black culture; it's other cultures as well, right? But we're real tight-lipped in Black culture, right? Like what happens in the home stays in the home. That's not anybody's business, and unfortunately, that is a breeding ground for a lot of trauma, whether it's abuse or sexual abuse or just anything, because you're told to keep it in, and it also makes you almost prey to being victimized because people know that you can't say anything. People know you're already dealing with all of this other guilt. So all they have to do is threaten that they're going to embarrass you, embarrass your family, and you keep your mouth shut. And it's something that's always struck me as really interesting with again, all cultures, with the Black culture, is that like gay people have always been in people's families, and people have always known. Everyone in like the uncle and their friend, the aunt and her roommate, like, you know what's up, like, you know. So why do we have to pretend like we don't know? And then why do we have to like stigmatize and be negative towards the people who are like, well, no, it's not my roommate, it's my girlfriend. Like, you've known for 20 years it was their girlfriend. Now that they're saying it, it's a problem and this person's horrible. Like, why do you feel like we have such, and this can go to either any or all of you, like, why do you feel like we have such a problem with allowing people to own their truth and walk in their truth? And we prefer to keep it all, hush hush, while we obviously know what's going on.
Sexual shame, I think again too, we have a tendency to compartmentalize experiences without looking at the whole thing, right? If you're going to look at the history of enslaved Africans here in the United States of America particularly, and understanding how sexual shame was used in our enslavement, right, in our ancestors' enslavement, and how those threads continue to inform silence, right? Sexual shame is what's rooted in that. And then, for survivors, it is about internalizing sexual guilt, because somehow the blame has been on, again, this theme that continues to go throughout, is that it is someone's fault that they allowed, and not understanding that that power was taken from them to begin with. So now we're talking about, how do families, individuals, and cultures navigate shame and uncomfortable emotions? And we don't talk enough about mental health and wellness enough to give people those tools.
And I want to say, like, one, there's something that's going to be a little bit light and funny, which I just think, because I like to use, personal experiences. That sexual shame is a very big thing. I know for me, like my great grandmother, she grew up early in the 40s and 50s, and it wasn't until I was little, I was like, I knew that something was a little different, that we always went to this lady's house all the time, spent all summers, and she was Aunt Person, whoever she was her name. And it wasn't until my great grandmother got sick on her deathbed to be able to understand that she was gay. And literally, like, she didn't hide it. Everyone knew. She only wore pants and button down shirts all week until she went to church. And then she had to put on a dress. And then she'd come home and put on her pants. And it was like, when I look back, I was like, how painful it had to be for her to live this way for so long, up into her death. And even though we knew who the auntie was, she wasn't included. She wasn't invited to all of these different family events and all that shame that's built up. And that's why I said, for me, with parents definitely getting that education, I would never want, any one friend, family, client, or whoever to feel that type of shame, because that is a lonely existence. So just like as Kiana was saying, being 7 years old, and what I like to call for children now, like, you had feelings that were bigger than your body could understand, and you had nowhere to put them. So yes, being 7 years old and having a suicidal thought is realistic, but we've grown up with a ways like, oh, you're a kid, you don't feel this, you don't know this. Why
Yeah,
not? I'm a person. I'm a
yeah,
human being. I may not be able to understand all of my feelings and understand specifically what's happening to me, but it's going on. And just going back with the sex positivity in your home, I was fortunate to grow up in a sex positive home, in my home, not everywhere else, but in mine. And it's, I've seen how it has destroyed so many different families, people who don't talk to their families for 30 years, or, somebody dies, it's like, oh, well, I haven't talked to them in so long because of those feelings. And it's just, it's just really hard. So for me, it's, having that support and dealing with people when they're called the hotline, or even when I used to have a lot of the clients in the foster care system who were who were a part of the LGBTQ community, had no outlet, nothing to do, to get it out. And they were our highest suicidal rates, which was really, really unfortunate.
Yeah. And families or individuals being able to discuss that this is mom's girlfriend or dad's boyfriend, or whatever the pronouns are at the time. It's letting go of that misguided belief that, oh, if they know that you're gay or if they know that you're lesbian, you're going to pass it on to them, right? Like it's a disease. You're going to pass it on to them. I always use the example that I am wholeheartedly a lesbian. Like I said, I've known since I was 5, but I raised a son who is cisgender, heterosexual, and the most welcoming and inclusive person that you will ever meet, because we were able to discuss sexuality at a very young age. So it's being inclusive, it's being accepting, and it's letting go of the thought that what we are is a disease that we might pass down. I always say my parents were heterosexual, but they raised a lesbian woman. And there's no different than an LGBTQ person being able to raise, a child that might be heterosexual or LGBTQ. There's nothing to say that I'm going to pass this down like it's a disease. So it's just being able to be open and talking about it and letting go of that misguided belief.
Yeah. And again, it's not that, like you mentioned, it's not a disease. It's something that, people just have. They're born that way. Some are, some aren't. I think that's why it's also really important that we start teaching more people about the scale, so that people aren't rejectant of the fact that, like, hey, I'm supposed to be straight. Why am I slightly attracted to that person over there? Am I gay? Am I blah, blah, blah? And that brings in resentment. And then they reject people who are gay or, otherwise even harder, because they don't want to admit that little part of it in themselves, because no one's been telling them that that's normal, because we're all on this scale. Granted, some people are definitely way more straight and way more gay, but, some people just have like a little bit in one direction or the other. And that's, it's perfectly natural. When we talk.
Can I name something?
Yeah.
Just real quick too. I think also too, when we talk about that scale, to include asexuality and aromantic folks,
Yes.
right? And that, it is something where it's okay if you don't have that drive, right? You were born with it. You just were born with it. You don't have a sexual drive or a desire to want to engage with folks too. So I think also too.
About that, sorry. So with asexual, because I always thought that like asexual people weren't overly sexual, like they didn't necessarily like want to have adult relations or whatever, but I thought they would still fall on that scale as far as being attracted one way or another. Like, couldn't you be gay and asexual or straight and asexual?
Absolutely. So yes, attraction versus desire, but I also too, you can be both, and also you can be none of those, right? You can be like, I'm not.
Uh-oh, we lost your sound.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. So, right, it's both and, not either or. So going back against that spectrum as well, because still attraction is about, when we're talking about attraction, we're talking about not romantic and sexual. So someone can be romantically attracted to folks, like I want to be in a relationship, but not innately have the desire to want to have sex. So arousal, right? Arousal versus lubrication or erection, right? So people can be attracted and still not desire to have sex. So I think it's also important to include those folks.
No, I agree. Thank you for adding that. And then something else I wanted to talk about, when we think about the different impacts of just living with being part of that community, as you will, is that time where you want to let other people in, and where you want, we say coming out. Recently I was told we're going to try to change it to letting people in, which I like a little better. I've always hated that you have to come out. Like, I didn't have to declare I was straight to anybody. I just got to roll through being straight. And it always frustrates me too when I hear people say like the gay agenda. There was a movie, or it was something for kids, right? And there was a gay character, a gay thing. And, there was a little bit of hoopla, like, oh, the gay agenda. And it's just like, it's not a gay agenda to put something in a movie or show that reflects real life, and gay people are real and they're really part of real life. So having that in a movie or a show is not a gay agenda. Like the lens that you look at it through, the way you view it is not the same way a child is viewing it. You know, you're seeing a flamboyant person who you're like, oh, that person's gay. And that child's just seeing a fun, flamboyant person. And maybe that child has been holding in their flamboyancy and now they feel like they can let it go. And that's the whole thing with having representation and having seen people who are just like you. And hopefully seeing that, especially at younger ages, as you grow, and even as adults, hopefully that makes it easier for people to, as they say, let people in to that side of them. Not that you should have to, you know, declare your sexuality or talk about it, but it is a huge part of you. And it is something that people still like to have addressed. So I guess, how does one really prepare for that? Like, let's say someone, you know, part of this conversation or watching is thinking like, I'm ready to own my truth. Like I am ready. But it's gonna be stressful. I can imagine it's gonna impact your mental health, you know, whether you've had depression or anxiety or whatever leading up to it. So how can someone combat that or get ready for that step? Any of the above? I guess I'll start with Tanisha. Oh no.
I got, you know, about to say whoever gonna jump first, you know,
No, you do first, go for it.
I think the other thing too is to talk about, well, what will the joy be to be connected authentically to yourself? I think too often we root the inviting in process as this process in which people are not going to want to be invited in. So really being able to identify those you already feel safe with, right? Being able to understand your relationship to joy and pleasure and like connecting to that and being your authentic self. Because again, that narrative largely is somehow queerness and transness is innately something that is heartbreaking or hard or difficult, when really it is liberating, right? To be connected to truth, to be connected to your truth, and being able to have that conversation about what will it be to be connected to that truth. And really finding support and community to help you navigate that. And I'll start there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would have said the same exact thing,
Perfect.
definitely having, support, you need that. And that may mean, some people are not allowed in, you're not allowed to go into this space with me because you don't respect it yet. You don't understand it. You're not educated. And also don't feel like the person who, is deciding to live their authentic life, feel like that you have to educate every single person. Just like Queen said, these things work. And it can type up Google, and there is so much relevant information that we have that people can like, hey, I'm gonna give you these resources and you got to do what you need to with that, and then come back to me and let's have a conversation. The same thing as you're talking about white allies. Do you know how much information is out here? I don't have to educate you on it. Like, you doesn't have to be me. So definitely, especially if they're youth, they definitely need a good support system built around them that is going to support them and be in their authentic self. And hopefully, if we continue to do that, we won't have people in their 30s and 40s who have been appeared cisgender and married the person, had the kids, did all these things, and then 10 years later, they're like, oh yeah, well, I'm gay. Well, I've been gay. Well, you wasn't gay yesterday. I was, but because of all of the pressure, and things that I have to aspire to these different things, I couldn't be. But now I'm in a safe space. Maybe your children are older. Maybe different things have changed in your life where you now have the ability to do it. So it's really about the support, educating yourself, what you want to see happen with the relationships around you, and you go from there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. Just knowing who you can let in, utilizing your support system, knowing that you have that cousin or that friend or that parent or auntie or school teacher or therapist that is inclusive and welcoming, and knowing that, okay, I'm ready to let someone in. I can let this person in. For our youth, we have the high school GSAs, right? They may not be as inclusive as we want them to be for, brown and Black youth, but I do know that they are inclusive and welcoming when it comes to wanting to come out or identifying as LGBTQ plus and not wanting to come out, but wanting to be, not wanting to let them in, right? I'm still using coming out, I'm sorry. But wanting to be around individuals that are alike, we have the high school GSAs, and then we also have therapeutic support. Journey Wellness is huge on, gender identity and sexual orientation. So just knowing who your support systems are that you can welcome in.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you three so much for, the insight that you brought to the conversation. We're going to keep talking, but I want to give a chance to, as I mentioned earlier, have like a safe space, so some non-recorded time. If you're watching this on YouTube, we are going to include some links in the descriptions of resources that are available to you. But thank you for tuning in, and we will be back again next month.